Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here for navigating generational shifts in leadership and labor in the arts. Before we get started with introducing our panel, we would like to just take a quick survey of who's here, and we're going to do a couple of different ones. So we would like to see if there's anybody here from the silent generation, which means you were born before 1945. Anybody here? Raise your hand.
He raised his hand as he was walking.
Okay. What about baby boomers between 1946 and 1964? Great, got a few. Gen X. Say it loud and proud, my friend, say it loud and proud. Millennials, Gen Y, which would be 1981 to 1996. Great. Gen Z, 1997 to 2012. That's pretty respectable. Look at all you youngins here. I love it. And Generation Alpha, 2013. Any Gen Alphas?
They should be in school. Yeah.
Well, to present. Some are just starting to begin the workforce, maybe a little bit, or no? Well, I don't know. Brea's the expert on this. You can tell I'm reading off a piece of paper. In school. And then we also want to take a look at presenters, agents, artists, and all of that and see who we have here. How many presenters do we have in the room, please? Wonderful. Thank you. Agents, managers? Couple. What about artists? Okay. And what about our service or support organizations, conferences, leadership? Okay, few. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over and have our panelists introduce themselves. They're going to tell you a couple things about themselves, who they are, and what was your on-ramp like into your career, and tell us a little bit about that. And let's go start with you down at the end, Jane.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name's Jane Raleigh. I use she, her pronouns. I'm entering the space brand new, fresh to a new role as the Director of Museum Programming at National Geographic Society in Washington, D.C. If you've seen my face before, you may also recognize me from the last 12 years where I served at the Kennedy Center, finishing my last year in service as Director of Dance Programming. So lots that we could dig into about that trajectory today. I think when I think about generational shifts in the workplace, my on-ramp into the arts, I think, is interesting because I started at the Kennedy Center as an intern, fresh out of undergrad. Did 1 year as a salaried salesperson, and then basically spent 11 seasons growing up through the dance programming team at the center, starting as coordinator, finishing as director, leading that team. And then the difference of leaving that institution and now starting at a director level position in a new large institution has been quite an interesting brain shift and experience for my own life and career. I'll stop there, Brea.
Hi everyone, my name is Brea Heidelberg, she, her pronouns. My day job is as a professor. I teach in the Entertainment and Arts Management program at Drexel University. I also have a consulting firm. My arts background is in dance, so I came in through the field that way. And the other way that I wrap back around to this issue is my research and a lot of my consulting focuses on industrial psychology and human resources issues in the arts. And then as just a regular human, I have often been the youngest person in the room, not always the funnest. And so part of my research is just making sense of the world that I'm in. And so I've looked at things from that point of view as well, while also teaching undergrads and having a couple of get off my lawn moments myself.
Awesome. Hi, Kristy Edmunds. I'm the I'm the director of Mass MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts. Big former factory, visual art, performing arts, film, all kinds of things. So my on-ramp was really, I was working as an artist, and I started to realize that I was decent at moving the icebergs out of my colleagues' way so that they could find the lane for their practices. And that led me into what eventually became curating work in the, at the Portland Art Museum, which also was focused on performing arts and then obviously exhibition making. So I was telling a colleague today that walking up to the Hilton, I remember the very first time I ever came to an arts presenters conference. I was like 25, and I was working at an art museum, and I was responsible for this performing arts thing that I couldn't quite tell if they loved or not. But for me, it was a way to be in direct community with artists inside of a museum. So I was thrilled when I found out that there was a conference that had anything to do with performing arts, and then was completely disoriented and floored. My on-ramp was essentially self-taught, find the creative lane, begin to accept responsibilities, offer your highest and best, and see what happens.
Very cool. Thank you. I'm Kris Kaminski. I'm Senior Managing Partner with ECE Touring, a division of East Coast Entertainment in Richmond, Virginia. Go by she, her pronouns. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. My on-ramp into this field, back in the 80s, I was in a band. And that was, a long time ago. Started East Coast Entertainment when I was 19. And I was the youngest employee and started, in admin, and then became a college agent, booking bands for fraternities. And then we started a comedy division, and we started representing the Second City, and they said, hey, can you book us into theaters? And we said, we don't know that market, but we're not afraid to pick up the phone and call. And that teaching ourselves that industry, or this industry, started in the mid-90s. And I've now been with the company for 38 years, and am the first female partner owner within the company. So it's been quite a long journey. Our company is relatively large in terms of an agency size, and we have a lot of generations within our agency of agents, staff, leadership, et cetera. And it's just been a really exciting journey to see the company grow these many years. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate your time that you're giving us. So one of the things that we talked about when we were discussing this session was several different prompts and some different themes within these generational shifts we've all been through. And that we're coming into, and what we relate to in our own generations, and then working with other generations. And we came up with a few prompts. So I'm going to read off some of these ideas, and our panelists will field those questions. And at the end of the session, or when we get maybe 15, 20 minutes out, we're going to open the floor to your questions. And we have some microphones on either side of the house, and we'll open that up to you. So one of the things we wanted to talk about, sort of understanding the moment, like how have leadership expectations and definitions of success shifted across generations, and what do today's arts organizations need most from their leaders right now? And one of the things that we talked about in that particular prompt was that a few years ago, our field cried wolf about the great leadership transition for 2 decades. And people have not retired en masse the way maybe we thought that they would. People stopped with succession planning and support from funders. And so now that some of that is now actually happening, there's a dearth of knowledge about succession. And so we wanted to talk about that briefly. If one of you would like to grab that.
Okay. Sorry. That's one of the long-standing trends that I noticed in the field. In the 2010, 2015, it was, hold on to your butts because there's going to be this grand retirement and this grand upswell. And people kept saying, yes, in the next 5 years. They said in the next 5 years for 15 years. And so there was this leadership bottleneck of people that were stuck waiting for their next big moment, their executive director opportunity. And you get fatigued So some people left the field. Some people just got stuck and disenfranchised. And some people subscribed to becoming a part of the problem that they were frustrated with. And so that's where we are now, with more people having come behind and waiting, and fewer people leaving the field, or leaving the field but then still being on the board of directors. Founder syndrome, yeah. So that's sort of like the psychological goo that we're having to navigate now. So I just wanted to clarify what that comment comes from.
Yeah, I think the other thing this brings up for me is I don't know if power hoarding is the right term, but this idea, I think I certainly experienced it when I first entered the field, of people saying like, my audience is my audience, and my knowledge of leadership is my knowledge of leadership. And so part of that succession is a leader has to choose to give the knowledge as they are the leader without feeling threatened that the person below them is gonna come for them or take their job. And I do feel that personally as a leadership shift that is happening now, certainly in the Washington, D.C. presenters market. I feel like there was a generational shift where people were very against sharing. You know, we would talk about like, what if an artist is performing at my venue but did a master class at your venue? And for a while it was like, no, we're bringing them, they should do the whole engagement at our venue. And I think now there's much more of an openness to at least have a conversation for leaders to call each other, to share, to talk about shared resource, to bring an artist to town, splitting an engagement in different ways. But I think some of that comes from the generation older than me, like really had to fight hard to get those positions, especially women in those positions. I think we were talking about that in our prep call. So once you got to that leadership position, it was like, I'm gonna do everything I can not to give anything away, but not realizing that perhaps that was preventing younger folks working under them who were happy to learn and weren't trying to take the job, prevented them from gaining knowledge they needed.
I used to often say every leadership transition isn't Hamlet. Like, you know, just calm down. There's there's not going to be mass stabbings as these leadership transitions happen. And the scarcity mindset of our field does permeate every aspect of our field. And this idea of the arts ecosystem, including all of our organizations and, you know, all of the tangentially related organizations, can be an ecosystem. You don't have to hold on to somebody that's in a 2-year entry-level position for 7 years. You can train them really well for those 2 years, and then they can go to another organization. And if you have a good reputation for being a training ground, not only is that a really great position to have in your arts ecosystem, people are gonna come to you for that training. So you don't have to hold on to everybody in the position that they're in right now.
Should I utter some words on the subject? I love when you were speaking earlier about often coming from that notion of being the youngest person in the room. I too, when I was starting, I was very, very frequently the youngest person in the room, like, why am I even here type, that kind of youngest person in the room. And now I'm grappling with the fact that that is how I still think of myself. And yet I'm not the youngest person in the room anymore. So many different thoughts on the succession planning. I mean, one of the things that I noticed coming into the field was that I had, I was working in high-level, contemporary, very contemporary. So there was not any touch to a commercial market in the world that I was growing up in. It was on the pursuit of an aesthetic point of view or a revolution in aesthetics, trying to find a lane to elevate the visibility. And for artists and our colleagues at the time, the mobility of those ideas was something that we all focused very collaboratively on and hard, very, very focused to make sure our programmatic lanes were diverse and different. At the same time, to create that mobility, you needed to have a network of collegial peers, agents, producers, managers that were also going to help the mobility of that work or that idea. or assist in its funding or co-commissioning. So for me, there was a very interesting thing in watching the first kind of transition point. It was when the boomers were beginning to really leave the field and retire. And to your point about women, these are people who entered and helped define part of what we now call the field, I think. And that meant it was a profound labor of love. And that labor of love was traded off against wages. So when it came to retirement, where they'd finally maybe gotten up to $60,000 a year in a full-time salary as an executive director in a venue or a presenting house, that ability to retire, often they also didn't have health care, for decades. So that transition point was not part of the transition, actually. The need for that generation going out to find the retention of an economic was almost like a backfill in what I was observing. And I remember saying to myself at the age of 50-something going, oh God, it's gonna be really different for guys who can stay on in a different lane. But if I make a career transition, the last one I should do probably has to be in my early, middle 50s, right? Anyway, I've talked enough for now, but...
You're great. You're great.
Thanks. What about you? You're not just moderating, you've got a thought on this.
I think with leadership transitions, our experience with the original owners of the company, they eventually laid a really great foundation down to create succession planning so that they could retire and know that the future leaders at the company was going to be managed well and continue on after and we've retired all of our original partners. But beyond that, we also had to figure out how to bring up other people who were interested in maybe that career path, because maybe there's somebody who wants to be a future partner who's a new employee, but maybe there's somebody who's like, I'm just really happy being an agent my entire life. I love that, and I don't want the leadership responsibility. I don't want the ownership responsibility. I don't want to look at P&L statements and, manage a staff. And so how do we create that, and how do we create those spaces for people who are not interested in being sales? Because when you think of an agency, it's like booking shows, right? Or managing talent. And there's so much more space in there for communications and marketing and artist support services and accounting and all of those pieces. And so it's really, over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a bigger push within our company from our employees, where we've done surveys with them, where we have had to say, I love what I do, but I'm not going to be doing this when I'm 75 years old. Not because I don't love it, but, I want to spend time with my husband and go travel and whatever else. And so in order for that to happen, we need to be able to empower future leaders and make sure that they're ready for an ownership position or a leadership position. And how do we do that? And it's been a lot of intentional work, laying foundations, tweaking, and everything. But we're so much better for that now than just everything being decided by the ownership group. So we have non-owner leaders who have maybe a stake in some of the profit or whatever it might be, but that's really helpful to get their insight, and so that we can get them ready for when, the 11 or 12 of us or whatever it is are going to retire. So that's exciting. For us, you guys might not think it's exciting at all, but I love it. I will also say, because of COVID and everything, there have been people who have left the field because maybe they were a commissioned agent if they work for an agency, and now they're in real estate, or now they're teaching or doing something outside of the industry. And there has been it feels very recent, big influx of new professionals. And I think more than ever, I feel like we have a wide variety of age ranges in these leadership positions and in key positions in presenting organizations and some of the service organizations we work with. And a lot of that boils down to how does everybody communicate? And where do people butt heads? And how do we make that process smoother for everyone so that the Gen Xers aren't looking at their millennial counterparts or Gen Z with, like, all right, you just got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Let's get to it. Because that's not the mindset that our younger counterparts are working with. And so I think that there's a lot to learn from each other and to be open about communication, but I'm curious how you all have seen those sort of navigational things happen or communications within your own organizations, or any suggestions you might have for the people out here.
I hate when we always go in the same order, so I'm going to not talk. Oh, I guess you talked first before. Great. Thank you. For me, it all comes down to a difference around transparency, I think. I feel a very distinct differentiation between how open people are willing to be, and also, I think at the same time, how much explanation and transparency I have experienced from Gen Z colleagues wanting to understand why a decision was made or how you came to make that decision. And I have found only success in being more transparent. That it is, that while the question of like, well, why did you make that decision can feel aggressive or challenging, following through with saying, let me walk you through the factors that you may not have heard because you weren't invited to these meetings, and then I put these factors together and we had to weigh A over B because of money, and that's how we got to this answer. In my experience, 95% of the time, then the question that came pointed is like, oh, thank you for explaining, got it, understood. But I certainly felt like when I was an intern and in my early years in the field that folks were very reticent, leaders were very reticent to share decisions or final answers until they were like fully dotted and signed on the dotted line. And we knew that that was really what was gonna happen. There wasn't a lot of room to go back on a decision that was made. So to me, leaning into transparency and talking a lot more, which takes a lot more time, has only helped build relationships across generations in my workplaces.
I'll go for like advice. I think everybody needs care, and a lot of our organizations struggle between like compliance with things and still offering care. So when I think about a leadership transition, most people discount the fact that like leaving a job that you gave your heart and soul to, it is a grieving process. You do need to walk people through the grieving process. They're gonna experience it either way, but being open and honest about that helps them be aware. It helps everybody else in the organization provide a little more space and grace. And if you don't, the step in the grief process that's really gonna get you is anger. Where leaders tend to be, it seems like they want to burn everything down on their way out. And special shout out to my friend Todd Trebor, who's the executive director of RISCA, who we were talking about this over the weekend, and he was just like, yeah, and I finally had some people that I had to just say, are you just upset because you're leaving the thing? And in that, you get a better understanding of, like people are still human at the end of the day. So I think people that are transitioning out need to be walked through that grieving process. The people that are right underneath them need to be set up to not only take the leadership realm at the glass cliff when everything's on fire. A lot of boards, and I'm thinking specifically about nonprofit organizations, a lot of boards may have thought that there should have been an executive leadership transition, but they wait for a crisis or a flashpoint to act on it. And now you've just got a turducken of a hot mess because you've got the leadership transition, the actual crisis, somebody that needs to be onboarded into executive leadership that has not been prepared to step into this role, let alone step into the role while it's on fire. So standard operating procedures, policies and practices that are sound and humane and equitable. That's the kind of care that the people that are next in line need. And then the folks that are like entry to early mid-level, they need people to be more transparent about that decision making. Our field has a long-standing tradition of only honoring the fly by the seat of your pants onboarding and training special. When people are asking those questions, that's most of the time them trying to access tacit knowledge. I don't know how you made that decision, or I see that you're making that decision, but I don't know how you got there. I know how to mail merge. I know how to do Excel spreadsheet. I don't know how you get from these inputs to that output, and you gotta explain it or they're not gonna know. So one, from an organizational perspective, if your decision-making tree, when and how you communicate information, if these are standard things that are codified, then they can just go read and then come to you with more specific questions. Absent of that, everybody's just trying their best. So everybody needs different types of care, but more care.
More care. Yeah. More care when you're thinking about the leaders too. That's actually a really interesting thing, because often in my experience with colleagues who have been in leadership positions over time, the pressure points, there is a updraft, and it's big. And what will often happen with people who have been in leadership positions for a long chunk of time is that updraft makes their shoulders expand. And things that were really hard at the beginning, you can almost do in your sleep. So there's more and more and more that starts accruing to that leader. And at the same time, there's often a kind of assumption that because the person is accomplished or has possible wisdom or quirky ways of making rain or whatever happens, is that you don't know how, like you were saying, how they got there, but also how it feels for the person. And I have found when I'm working across generational landscapes with staff and the workforce, peers and colleagues, is a lot of the focus is on the, I would call it the character of feeling the inclusion principle of their intelligence, ideas, work, and aspirations. And they're in a different speed, like in a different kind of hurry on where to move, forward or laterally or in a different lane. And so one of the things that I think, I tend to work more as the director of MoCA closely with all the department directors and then often the managers. But I definitely do lots and lots of spot check with folks that are museum attendants or folks that are working in custodial. I do these checkpoints with everybody. That crosses a lot of different generations, but also a lot of different character. A lot of different kind of personal character, how somebody wants to be perceived, what they want to be invited to, and then it gets into areas of compensation. In my generation, it was always a sign of, we sought after the ability to have autonomy, to be able to beaver away at something and then bring it and see if that was going to work, as opposed to let's all move together all the time in a pack in order to get something done. So it's been a different kind of exchange point. Am I just banging on now and not making sense?
No.
Okay. I just wanted to add one other thing. There was a process that when I first got to MoCA, because MoCA is in a former manufacturing hub. It's an old factory, abandoned. There's a whole long story about it. So it has this confluence between folks who have been in that town and that community of North Adams very resiliently for a long period of time, where their entire economy collapsed, and it was manufacturing based. And then a contemporary art museum with performing arts festivals and all these other things came in, and it's the beginning point of a creative economy. And that, you can't just understand a creative economy out of nowhere. So a lot of what we have dealt with is really how is the community and the employees from the community adjusting and manifesting inside of those different points of training or on-ramps. And then there's the global contemporary artistic practices across form, where people are migrating in for jobs inside of what a mission, purpose, and I suppose what the brand stands for. And that also crosses different kinds of generations and workflow. So for me, it's this asset across all of it, but it doesn't mean it's utopian every day.
Excellent, thank you. I know for our company, one of the things that we do with everyone, we have a monthly Leadership Connect, where everybody across all departments, we get together and we talk about leadership strategies. Some of it is a sort of a toolkit of how to do something. I think one of the first ones we did last year talked about love languages. How do your employees, how do your coworkers like to be recognized? Is it acts of service? Is it gifts? Is it recognition? Those sorts of things. And it's a really basic thing, but unless you really know your employees and what matters to them, if they really like gifts for recognition of good work, and all you ever do is just praise them, you're not hitting the mark. So that was just one session we did. We do a monthly Leadership Connect, and it's across all departments. But we also have, without it sounding like all we ever do is meet, but we have other like sub-departments meet, or they meet within their group. And but I think one of the big things has been is that when you hire somebody to come in and do the job and you've trained them, let them do the job. There are so many leaders who are afraid to delegate that responsibility out because they think, I'm the only one who can do this. And that's simply not true. And there is an element of trust and training and everything. If you train your colleagues correctly, your new employees correctly, and then give them the opportunity to do the job so that they can grow and thrive. But those weekly or those monthly meetings have just been so beneficial to everybody. And I'll say for myself as a 50-something that some of the sessions that our younger leaders bring up, and again, some of it's like the toolkit stuff, whether it's technology, because some of that baffles me. I'm relatively good, but things that they bring in and like, here's how you do this, and I feel like I'm learning so much from them, even though I've got the institutional knowledge about our company. And so there is an exchange on that, like you were talking about, how did we get to that decision? Why do we do it this way? Not that it has to stay that way, but why are we doing it that way now? And then how do we modify that? How do we move forward? How do we change that system or that process or whatnot so that it works with today's technology or works more smoothly for everybody? So those are some of the things that we've done that have been sort of practical processes and applications that have worked well for us. We've got a few more minutes for this section before we go into some Q&A. I thought this was a really interesting piece that came up when we were having our prep meeting, that an organization's mission is the one that's most broadly shared by its people. Like you apply for a job because you think you like the idea of what the company does or the organization does, right? But how does that change if it's weaponized against you? Any thoughts on that?
I'm going to start, but I wasn't the one about the weaponizing, so
I know, I wasn't either.
I don't know how to quite get there, but I want to learn and hear more about that. But I definitely do think that there is a thing, the mission of an organization, when it is directly linked to both value and a kind of declaration of purpose, can be one of these kinds of highly compelling aspects of why somebody migrates towards that organization, why you want to lean towards it or lean forward, why you're in it. But the missions evolve, like the work evolves, they're not fixed in time and space. I've also definitely seen in the field over time where there will be something that's going on in the mission of an organization, but it's gone completely stale, and somebody has got to bring some heat and truth to that fact. And so sometimes there's a rigor towards moving towards an organization or a stage where that colleague, that professional, that leader wants to create a revolution for the mission to be able to assert its relevance so that they can either stay or continue to uphold cause and purpose. So I find them in both ways. One of the other things that was really interesting, I was working with a lot of global colleagues, and this on kind of a similar topic, and what was interesting in that was that often a director who usually, not always, not a sweeping generalization, but has become a director after accumulating a certain amount of experience over time, they will have an idea of what they think most motivates the staff or young leaders or department heads or various things like that. And usually top of the list will be mission, the mission and vision of the organization. The fact that we found from massive global data search is that often younger people working into the professional field, that is not the primary thing that motivates them. And in fact, it's way down the list. That and how that plays out, I think, is a really important thing for us to think through collectively and together around where the mission must evolve to be able to accompany continuing sets of need, purpose, and different frameworks for approaching it. Because the world's not just fixed in one moment. It's constantly spinning on an axis of a lot of other moments.
And I think, I mean, using the example of my husband's a third grade teacher, teachers are just underpaid across the entire country, right? And you often hear, well, but it's for the children, because you love the children, that's why you became a teacher. Yes, that's why he became a teacher. He loves teaching. That's why he's still doing it. But it would also be nice to be paid a little bit more, right? And what they're asked to do, because teachers don't just work a 40-hour week, even if they have summers off. It still doesn't equate to 40 hours a week. They work long hours. And so sometimes we find that in health and wellness industries too. Like, well, you got into, because you care for other people, your empathetic nature. And that's why somebody might go into a health and wellness field. You love the arts, but we all want to be paid for what we do, right? And so that's sort of, I guess sometimes if you are in a position where somebody says, well, we don't pay well, but you're working in the arts, and at what, is there a, no, you answered.
That's the weapon.
No, you answered the question correctly, and there's no, that was the one avenue we were going down. But I think that how do you navigate that as a young professional? Yes, that's why I got into it, but I also, how do I keep moving that forward?
Yeah, so I would say, let me explain the weaponization piece. Quasi-vocational careers, so teachers, nonprofit human services, all this good stuff that we do, religious practitioners, you are just in the capitalism of it all set up to be exploited. That your exploitation is an input into the system because the presumption is that, yes, you'll get paid something. It will not be your quote-unquote market worth. Go with me on the invisible hand and the fuzzy numbers here. And that gap, you're gonna be okay with because of the mission. And as a field, I'm gonna say we because I'm in the field now, but I surely wasn't signing off on this. We didn't fight it when that was first introduced. We didn't fight it when it was solely gender-based, right? Because, statistically speaking, entry-level, mid-level, upper mid-level, femme-identified heavy, executive leadership, male heavy, generally speaking. A lot of the underlying presumption of that is the, you were younger, you were going to find a man, and when you married him, it didn't matter if you weren't making enough money, because it's nice that you were doing something and your husband will provide for you. That's what the socioeconomics of our field is. We didn't fight it then. And so now we've got all those compounding layers of rationalization over the years. The migration of the starving artist to the starving arts administrator and the glorification of that, the caps on general operating support that come from public funders, like all of these things work in concert. And now that eggs are $1 billion, like, this is a fight we should have been having. We didn't have it. We should definitely have it now. But just be aware that when we start pulling on that thread, we're going to pull up some stuff that's been unresolved in the field. And so it's difficult to tell people entering the field, you just got to take it on the chin. There's, like, as prices have increased and our pay has not, that gap that you're expected to be okay with has continued to widen. And the do it for the love, like, the love does not pay your rent.
I think this connects to two things I keep peeking at other things that people are saying, and let's see if I can remember both of them. One, this notion of what you're saying is, like, we have a tendency, I think, grounding myself in the field also, of just saying, like, that's not how it's ever been done, or, like, this has always been an issue. I also was poor when I was a coordinator. So, like, that's just what you're gonna get, and not leaving space for, it could be a younger generation, but it could just be someone with an interesting idea to, like, suggest breaking the system and trying a different thing, and the field not really leaving space for experimentation in that way, of just saying, like, well, our funding just comes from the grants, and if the grants go away, then where are we gonna find the money? Like, there is more money in the world. We just have to figure out where we're getting it from. And I think back to what you were saying about this updraft of leadership, and how leaders have to feel like, I was thinking about it from being the drafter, that when you're not in a defined leadership position, how easy it feels to just say, like, well, that's not how I would be doing it, and, like, this is why I hate how she always does that, and she always says this, and blah, blah, blah. And certainly in this moment of national change and crisis, in my own personal experience the last year at the Kennedy Center, I very much experienced a moment of, like, oh shit, I'm the adult in the room now. And, like, all that stuff I've been shouting up at the updraft, like, put the coat on and do the thing. Or, like, I've been seeing the cracks in these structures. If I have an idea to change the thing, I better just start doing it. And I'm seeing, which I think is amazing, at least in the local Washington, D.C. community, a lot of people just doing the thing. And probably 80% of those things will fail, and those weren't the successful experiments, but I have come to believe this year that trying to do the thing is the only way to maybe get out of the pattern.
I always tell people, make new mistakes, at the very least.
Yeah. Love that.
Thank you. That was really great, everybody. Appreciate all your insight on that. I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions, because we're coming up almost 45 minutes into the session. Some of this is more like broad theory. We've got some practical application things, but we would like to hear if anybody has any questions about your organization, something you're trying to navigate, might want some insight on that. And we have a microphone over here that's got a spotlight, and one right over here.
Yeah. Hi there, I'll get us started. My name is Tom O'Connor. I run a firm called TOC Arts Partners. We do a lot in executive transition, search, all those things, but a lot of other stuff that I won't bore you with now. But what I wanted to ask you about was, first of all, this conversation has been fantastic, and I'm really grappling with what I see as somewhat of an existential issue in our field right now. And what I'm sitting with is that, a lot of what we talk about in organizations around their grappling with this question says a lot about their future orientation. And I'm curious where this question lives in your organization day to day. So for example, is it something you hold as leaders? Is it something you have support on with HR? Is sort of, what does that look like? I know this question has a bit of an institutional bias, so apologies for that. But where does it sit in terms of supporting you as leaders in grappling with it? And do you have HR support? What does that look like?
Sorry, what was the essential question?
Just around intergenerational workforce leadership, sort of how you deal with engaging across that difference in the day-to-day.
No HR support, really. We don't really talk about that in the field much. That's my research area, so I know, because I go to call people for help and I realize that I'm calling myself. And so, one, do that and do that better. Yes, please, and thank you. Policies and procedures, right? One of the biggest traps we fall into in nonprofit structures in general, nonprofit arts, the hearts and the minds. And when I started doing my research and my work, I was like, yes, hearts and minds. And if we just educate people, whatever. I just need you to act right at work. Policies and procedures, right? And the policies and procedures about how we make decisions, who's in the room when we're making decisions, how to turn your gaze so that you can see people that are in your, like, I always say this thing about driving. You have to physically turn and check your blind spot before you change lanes. No, you don't mean to hurt anybody, but you're still coming up off your deductible if you don't check your blind spot. And policies and procedures that help turn leaders' heads to notice what is around them is, you can do that, and then it's just there. Board leadership, 501c3 structure was a real bummer for me, because people who are in charge of executive leaders, hiring, managing, supporting, and fire them are largely untrained in every single one of them things. Get you some training. So that you can track and see if you have somebody that's equipped to do this. And if not, get them consulting, get them coaching, get them support. If they are and they're purposefully wilding out, replace them, hold them accountable. Because that tone that you set about what is categorized in as acceptable behavior and what is categorized out as unacceptable behavior for all of these things, for operating, for communicating, for just being in an organization, if you don't hold people accountable, then the people who are in the wrong know that they now have a license to ill. People that are being harmed know that there's nobody coming to save them. And the people that are on the fence are like, well, if I act this way, I'm going to get results. So you're actually going to compound your problem by not holding people accountable. So I would say policies and procedures, training to be able to actually manage folks, because we all get a lot of training in how to do the functional operations of our jobs and not how to manage people. So you get promoted until your point of incompetence with managing people. So we got to account for that too.
Excellent. I was going to add, it's a slightly different thing, but it taught me a lot. When I first had come to MoCA, I recognized it was right at the kind of second wave, not quite over, of the pandemic. So as we all experienced, there was a lot of exhaustion, there was a lot of reinvention, there was a lot of fear, there was a ton of layoffs, you know, all these different kinds of things. So one of the things I was thinking about across the generational lanes inside of MoCA, and this is probably also, I wanted to find creative solutions to some of these things, because the kind of barrage of what I knew would eventually need to become policies and whatnot, they were like, if I have to have more policy or more itemized things, I'm going to lose my mind. They couldn't absorb more at that moment. Obviously, that's a temporary lane. So we created this thing called the Lemonade Fund. And the Lemonade Fund was about a philosophy of accompanying one another through a diversity of different kinds of needs, that pay scales and various things were not, in compounding wages, yet able to address. So it was the kind of thing where a certain amount of money per year per employee under a certain amount would have the ability, and HR and the people in culture department managed it, So it was blind. It wasn't kiss the ring and then you'll get some support. But it was those kinds of life crises that can throw people quickly. And how do you turn to it? To whom did we used to turn? Our family, our neighbors, or whatever, when we hit something. So this was a fund that we continue to do to this day, but it changes and it improves, but it creates a cash dispersal around unique and accelerating opportunities for the workforce, as well as to recognize the different moments of challenge that might, a bump in the road, for lack of a better word, or your pipes freeze, and now you're like screwed, and they broke in the basement. So I wanted to bring it up because what ended up happening was very interesting, and it was generationally interesting, that the kinds of needs that would cause a crisis or cause that bump in a road for an incoming part of the workforce generationally was already what they were drowning in, from student loan debt, from all these other things, cost of living, the escalating. So that was like, how do you make those qualifying expenses? So we did put in student loan relief for a period of time, various things like this. But it also was to make sure that other kinds of needs that were happening in a different generation were also being addressed. You may need daycare and healthcare. You may need student loan debt relief to a certain extent, up to a certain amount. You, another generation, have your parents now in elder care and are dying. How do we stretch that so we're able to also, through the kinds of yearnings and ideas of mutual care, create a lane inside of the institution carved out with dedicated funds to address the diversity of those things across time as a philosophical way of addressing, to accompany versus judging somebody else's needs against your own, and to be in mutual care around those things generationally.
That's great. Thank you for that. That's really interesting.
Hi, Morjana Celeste Barricchio of Mosaic Dance Theater Company, and I have a question for Kristy to clarify. Earlier you mentioned that the people seeking, I guess, connection with an organization, in many cases the mission and the purpose was at the bottom of the list. What was at the top?
Well, for that, in this survey, and it's an interesting one globally, but the top of the one had much more to do with what Brea was talking about around clarity of a manager, a person who really is going to help lead it, like almost to the point where the value of what you were earning in your salary, and it would weaponize you if you were trading that off. But the willingness, like the job quality improves exponentially if the time, policy, practice, and clarity is present from managers, direct managers in the skill set, not always further up in the highfalutin strategic planning air of the director, but in the immediate who you lock and load and work with together.
Organizational culture.
Yeah, I was going to
What'd you say?
The organizational culture.
Yeah.
Every time.
that I identify with that. To me, like if the environment day to day is horrific, what you're working towards doesn't matter.
Yeah. I had to translate it in my brain a little bit because it was sort of like when kids get together and you're in school and it's like, if you get Ms. Jones for math, you are going to love it. But if you get Mr. Richardson, And it's that same thing. Make a lateral move towards the knowledge content, but when you have solid people who are helping to run that well, people want to gravitate towards that department, even change their careers. And it could be because of the impact of a really strong manager.
Yep.
Thank you.
Greetings, Don Steffi with the Indianapolis Ballet. One, I would have enjoyed at the very front end, just me, if we would have known what generations each of you represented.
I put my hand in the air.
Yeah,
Did you?
I did too. I'm Gen X.
Yeah, I figured that.
Millennial.
So there's about three.
I'm a geriatric millennial.
Yeah. So 2 or 3. So in our operation, internally, there are 4 generations that we work with. my board of directors, there are 5 generations, from silent to Gen Z. But it's great, and the one reason it's great is everybody listens to each other. So I just want to throw that out. But to your one thing earlier, something that I had to, so I'm the son of the greatest generation. And so my brother and I, our work ethic is like those generations would. You keep silent, you do what you're going to do. But I was thrown by a young individual I hired who constantly asked me, so why did you make that decision? And I wanted to say, what does it matter? I made it, you have to do it. It took me a little while to really understand, but it does take time and patience to explain why, and then to what your point is, we all work better together, but it does take time and patience. And 2 of my younger individuals who are still with us, we're all going great, we're talking about what you said. They want to learn. They want to learn for their growth. And I'm going, okay, I didn't hire you for an intern. I hired you as an employee. I want you to do your job. I'm not here to train you. That's for me. But in all this, where I'm going to end with is when you talked about culture. So we were having a pretty strong issue with one of our leaders. And over the last 2 years, we actually formed a culture and wellness committee of the board, so that the board also understood and could act and a lot of them are professional in this area. So that really helped, because then everybody started to be able to speak or share. They knew they could. It was a little different than an HR department, but it was about culture and wellness, which really helped the organization a lot. All my 2 cents right there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for this wonderful panel and session. I was just wondering if there was some sort of standardization of legal being involved in some of these gatekeeping, boys clubbing, putting a lead foot on someone's growth over a decade type of trends that we've seen for the past 30 years, roughly, in the field, because it was sort of triggering for me when the discussion of how frequently and across the board this is found, and I've definitely experienced the pressure on a legal department to be there to accommodate the board, of course, be there on par with strategic planning leadership, presidential and directorial leadership, and there's an intimidation or pressure factor clearly on that department to look above them for how to or what to do, rather than to worry over mid-level staff concerns necessarily. And certainly, for those reasons, entry-level staff may be less visible on the priority chart for the legal. But in terms of communities, mid-level staffers, entry-level staffers having to always disclose some of the things that were spoken about in terms of family needs or personal crises, I find it horrifying to think I have to divulge all of my life's trending events with my employer. I really appreciate the separation of church and state where it comes to employment versus personal business affairs. So I'm just wondering, instead of normalizing the discussion of feelings or concerns or even care, is there no sort of, this is just not acceptable by law? How can we empower the legal standards of our industry better?
Well, and one
love
thing
that
we have
so
to
much.
say is that we are not attorneys. So we can't obviously offer legal advice, and things may be different from one state to another state, and that is really that's really important to look at. Like, our company is in multiple states, so we actually do have a professional employment organization, PEO, for anybody that is familiar with that has to keep us in compliance in all of the different states that we're in. And what's in Virginia is going to be different from something else. But
I think she was also,
Yeah.
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, you're also just asking what the lay of the land
Yeah.
is?
yeah,
Yeah.
So not
Me
a
too.
lawyer.
Yeah.
From the
lawyer.
federal employment legals, no, unfortunately not. There is not much. In order to be in legal compliance, you can still get away with a whole host of ills. It has to raise to a certain threshold of harm. And by that point, most humans will get away from the harm if they can, and so they're leaving the organization. You've also got a timestamp on most of this stuff, 180 days unless it's pay or compensation related. If it's pay or compensation related, every paycheck restarts that clock. There's a group called End Psychological Abuse who is trying to get laws put in place in the different states, and eventually a federal law against psychological abuse in the workplace. But there isn't much, unfortunately.
Just a quick follow-up question. Do you often...
well, I'm sorry. I know we're
Okay.
at time.
We're at time, but we'll come out.
But because
Talk.
there's other sessions but if there are some additional questions,
Yeah.
we do have, I think some of our panelists might be able to answer them individually. But I know we have another session that's going to be starting in the room. So this really could go on for 3 hours. But thank you so much, everyone,
Thank
for
you
being
all.
here. We appreciate you very much.
Stay the course.
Thank you.